talk show. I'd just like to say that today is our 60th show, and I'm very happy to have on our show today Paul Bowen. Paul is a sculptor. He is also a master of assemblage from found objects. He's exhibited worldwide in galleries and museums, and his work is in collections both public and private. He was born in Wales, and he spent 30 years in Provincetown, Mass., and he has been 16 years now in Williamsville, just up the road from us. So, welcome today, Paul Bowen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
it's really
you.
a treat to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you on the show, and there are so many different things to talk about. I love the fact that you were born in Wales, but you came to America in your 20s?
I was 21.
21. You have hardly an accent at all. It's very hard to discern.
I'm sure my grandparents are rolling over.
Do you go back there?
Not anymore. You know,
Yeah.
when my folks died, actually before my mother died, we had to sell the family house to keep her in the old people's home and care. And invariably, I've lived, you know, in the States for well over 40 years. My brother's lived in Canada for the same length of time.
Huh.
And so our family back there doesn't have the same ties that we all used to have.
Right, yeah.
And we've lost touch, and now we don't have a home to go to anymore. So it's quite a different thing altogether.
Yeah.
But my roots are still, you know, very important to me. So.
You know, I think that this is something that sort of seems to run throughout many of the things that we talked about the other day as well, is that there's a real sense of place in the works that you do. I think the objects that you find to bring into your sculptures and your assemblages, and you know, I'm wondering if you find a similarity between Wales and Vermont at all.
That's so interesting you say that, because my wife and I, Pam, she's a writer, I should say, we moved to Williamsville from the Cape, and the way that happened was that I was working at Dartmouth as artist in residence. I guess it's 17 years ago now, and I had just learned to drive, which is kind of late in life. But I always lived in towns where in the UK there was really good public transportation.
Right.
And in Provincetown, it's a very small town. You could walk everywhere. I would bike everywhere. I remember biking home with the Christmas tree on one occasion. You know, so it's possible. I would take the bike out to the beach, go fishing. You know, I'd do everything, and I would collect from my materials on the beach or wherever I was. I would just collect what I could carry, which was an interesting sort of criteria in a way. But it got to a point that it just seemed time to, perhaps it was because I was depending upon other people to transport my equipment and my, you know, if I do teaching or workshops, I have a lot of equipment that has to be carried around. So learning to drive, I finally bit the bullet. So by the time I was doing my gig at Dartmouth, I was a pretty new driver, but that meant that, you know, you work whenever you want in the studio there, and I would travel around, and for some reason I barely set foot in New Hampshire. I spent all my time exploring Vermont.
Yes.
And down at this end of the state, I was driving around and stumbled into Newfane, and invariably I was drawn to back roads and dirt roads, and the dirtier the better, and discovered Williamsville. And it's true that when I described the area to my wife, who was back in Provincetown taking care of the aged dog, that I described it as being very similar to the area of Wales I was from. So you're spot on,
it's
actually.
Interesting.
So it's like definitely a connection.
Yeah. I can see how we are drawn in those ways, you know, whether it's weather, climate, or the terrain, or both, or all.
Climate, not so sure, because Wales is much wetter than here.
But not as snowy.
But not as, especially now. But though I remember 1962, I think it was. I was very small.
You were hardly born.
I was hardly born. Where the snow drifted to the tops of telephone poles.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow. But that was most unusual, right?
Very,
Yes.
very unusual.
Yeah.
And that year the ocean froze in my hometown, and that was unheard of.
You spent 30 years in Provincetown, so you were part of the culture there. You were part of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you spent a lot of time on the waterfront as well.
I think I discovered the waterfront after the first day I was there. And how I ended up in Provincetown was that I had done graduate work in Baltimore, and I went back to Britain to teach for a couple of years, and realized pretty quickly that I did not want a career in teaching, not a tenured track. Although it would have been such a good idea, because now I'd be reaping those retirement benefits.
But you would have had to go. You would have had to go through all those years of being discontent.
And I'm not a committee person, so I was looking for an opportunity to come back to the States, do something just as an artist, not as a teacher, and I found this fellowship program, artist in residence program in Provincetown, which was founded in 1968, and it annually invites 10 visual artists and 10 writers to spend October through May. And in those days, there was no summer program there. They just rented out the facilities to support the program. And now there are residence programs like that all over the country.
Yeah, a lot,
but it was somewhat unusual at the time. It was a long-term residence. The McDowell and the other really super well-known places are short residencies, and this was 7 months. And it was by the sea. And indeed, it's just at the end of one of the streets, and you look down the street, and there is the bay.
There's the ocean, yeah.
And I was down there. And I grew up in a seaside town, so,
Yes, again, locale.
Yeah.
How much do you think, it's kind of a tricky question, but how much do you think your relationship, you have an instinctive relationship to place, obviously. How much do you think that informs your art, the manifestations that you create?
When you said that, talked about that a little bit just before we started, I sort of flicked the camera, the roll of film through my head, and I was trying to think how that makes sense to me now. And when I think of Wales and I think of home, there are very, very specific places I think of as resonating, as being meaningful. For instance, behind our home in Wales, which was on the crest of a hill overlooking the Irish Sea, and on a clear day you could see the coast of Ireland and the Isle of Man, and you could actually see Liverpool Cathedral, but because of the curvature of the earth, you could only see the top of it. And the same with Blackpool Tower, which is a bit like the Eiffel Tower, but you couldn't see the bottom of it because of the curvature.
Because you have a story associated with it. For one thing,
it's all about stories.
An awful lot of it is about stories.
Yeah.
You've been a teacher. You've been a lecturer. And I know that you did little stints at different places. You were at Dartmouth for a while, at Marlborough College, at Landmark.
Yep, that's true.
What did you enjoy about teaching?
Should I say the paycheck?
If it's honest.
Well, yeah. I mean, in all those places, you get to deal with students from all over the world, and that's really wonderful. In one of my teaching jobs, I had an Afghani student, an Egyptian student, and that's commonplace.
Yeah.
So we bring our lives and autobiography to the work that we do, as artists do, and to see students bringing that with them, and suddenly, occasionally, just see a light go on.
Right.
That you introduce them to something, and there's a kind of blankness, and you inadvertently say such and such, and suddenly and from then on they just catch fire, and all you have to do is fan the fire a bit, and that's lovely,
Yeah, it's satisfying. It's very satisfying. Let's talk a little bit about scavenging.
Okay.
Now, this is a word that you could also use the word harvester, I was reading in one of your catalogs, someone was talking about you using found objects in your art, and they said really it's objects that are sought as well as found.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Right.
I thought that was an interesting concept.
Well, in my world, it's not something you just stumble across. It's that I go on a mission, you know, and so something that's found, perhaps there's a sense of it's by accident, and there is obviously there is some of that, but you know, I'm fully aware of why I'm going out on the beach, let's say, or the riverbank, or you know, I do dam sites as well here in Vermont, because those are good places for me to find materials.
Yes.
But I look for all kinds of things at the same time, and so there are areas that I beachcomb on the Cape where I still go back for at least a couple of weeks every year, and I tend to go to the same areas, and the areas that I go, there's an area that was used as the town dump for hundreds of years, and there you can find things that were left a week ago or they were left 200 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And so you can be finding historic material that's almost archaeologically interesting.
Yes.
But at the same time, I find a piece of driftwood that's got a rusted bolt attached to it.
Yeah.
And but there are thousands of things like that.
Yes.
And so it's taken a while to develop a criteria as to what is, well, that's nice, but I can't take that because of X, Y, or Z. You know, it's too rotten, it's too new, it's too this, that, or the other thing.
Yeah.
And there's some other kind of criteria.
Right. It's probably good to have parameters of some kind, right?
Well, you couldn't have a warehouse big enough. Otherwise, you know, it would not be possible.
I did have the privilege of going to Paul's studio, and I have to say that the raw materials are there.
It's very
And
politely
it was,
put.
Well, it was exciting. It was wonderful to see, you know, the things that, you know, you realize, oh, that's just an old piece of wood, or, you know, that's just a rusty bolt, or detritus, you know, and you know, when you look at your finished pieces, it's very clear that you may not necessarily, and probably didn't have an end in sight, but developing and putting things in relationship to each other. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yes. You know, there often is something in the back of my head, but very often that evaporates as I work. Like I have dozens of notebooks, sketchbooks, where there are drawings for sort of imaginary objects. And sometimes that will be the spur that gets me going. But I also use those books for resolving technical problems, so I'll make almost engineering type drawings, and although I'm not an engineer, that will help resolve a problem. There are like certain types of things I'm really, really bad at, and making a drawing sometimes will help resolve.
Yes.
And the other thing is I don't throw much away, so a piece of wood which might have been worked on 5 or 10 years ago, I still have knocking around somewhere. And sometimes it just happens to be lying next to something else on the floor,
Yes, right.
and they develop a relationship, which is lovely. In a way, every object in the world has a relationship with everything else. It's only a matter of the distance, the space between the cups.
Right. Right.
You know, there's still cups, but what is the shape of the space between the cups?
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Right. That's right.
I vividly remember my first art school teacher saying, draw that, but not the cups.
Yes.
And he was talking about the space. And so, it's a very convoluted answer.
No, it makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think it was Joseph Beuys I have here. He had a quote that I loved, which is that it's an investment of myth into mundane materials.
Who said that?
Joseph Beuys.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah.
No kidding.
I know, how
I
about
didn't know that.
I like to surprise my
I
guests.
can't believe he said that. It's so direct.
Yeah, right.
He was a really obfuscating
Yes.
character when he spoke about art. And everything he said was like a diversionary tactic.
Yeah. Well, you could see how this could be.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
Yes.
you know, someone might say, "What
But it's
are you
pretty,
talking about?"
you know, for him, that's from,
Yeah.
I think that's pretty
And
direct.
you almost studied with him, I believe.
Yeah, 71, 72, I was in art school in Wales and I was looking for graduate school. And I'd looked at one or two in India, I'd looked at a bunch in Britain. There were some American ones, but I wasn't really thinking. And then the Kunstakademie in Dusseldorf, where Beuys was the head of the sculpture department, and I knew, you know, I knew of him and had been following what he was doing, and I decided that's where I wanted to be. I couldn't get money to go, but I was determined I was going to find a way to go. And don't you know, that was the year, after many years of teaching, that he got fired. And he got fired because he accepted everybody that wanted to go and work with him. And by then, amongst young people, especially, he was famous.
Yeah.
And so there were hundreds of people who wanted to go and study with him. And so the Kunstakademie said, "You can't do that." And so he was fired.
You also use very interesting materials: wood, tar, wax, leather, all kinds of different things go in. Some paint, and not a lot of color.
No, but I make prints and drawings.
Yes.
And from time to time, there's quite a lot of color. And I also make my own inks and things like that. Materials, when you say leather, I should explain that it's leather off the beach. Tanned leather doesn't decay very easily.
Yeah, right.
And so from a dump from 100 years ago gets exposed, there's shoe leather, and it's still intact. I mean, I've got shoes where the heels are layers and layers of leather that are pegged together with little tiny wooden pegs that are still intact.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
So I've made a lot of work with that,
Yeah.
and of course a lot of wood.
Yeah.
Lot
Yeah.
of wood.
So you are partly archaeologist and, as Thoreau said, wreck master, which is another word for the consummate beachcomber.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I guess. I guess
Wreckmaster.
a wreck master.
Well, you know, wrecking, of course, was a very big part of the economy. The seaside towns, both here and in Europe, in earlier times, when long before the Coast Guard existed, or rescue services, and there was no GPS and there was no land-to-shore radio or anything like that, and charts perhaps were not as dependable as they are now. Ships came ashore by the thousands.
Right.
You know, if you look at a map of Cape Cod, a chart of Cape Cod with the wrecks marked, there are hundreds and hundreds of wrecks. And so the idea of a wreck master, someone who deliberately salvages, or even a wrecker who lures ships on shore with lights and stuff.
Oh, dear.
Oh yes, that was a big thing, especially in
yeah.
Cornwall, Cape Cod,
Yeah.
other places. Yeah.
Well, there's a whole history, you know, to Cape Cod that obviously a lot of people know about. But in
Sure.
terms of what Cape Cod is like now, you know, as a vacation land and a summer
It's
resort,
an outdoor lunatic asylum. Yeah.
has it always been such?
I think that there was part of the Outer Cape where there was a village that doesn't exist anymore that was called Helltown, because it was known as where the people who didn't obey the law or society's rules and regulations would cavort.
Not quite a prison, but
No, I mean, I think they were communities under their own law, you know.
You've been recognized, Paul. You've had many exhibits all over the world. You've gotten a lot of awards and fellowships and grants and honors, and you know, you've had a career, really healthy career in art, and you're still making art.
Yeah, yes, it's true. I'm looking at what my last gasp, or perhaps a second wind, has in store, and I don't really know. I'm making prints and drawings. That's the main thing I'm doing at the moment. And w- what my future is with sculpture and or painting, I don't know. Just don't know.
And just to give a little shout out, you've been working with River Gallery, with Helen Schmidt at River Gallery School for
I've been
printmaking.
making prints
Yes.
there,
Yeah.
and starting Tuesday next week, I'm teaching a class there.
Oh,
and
excellent.
It's called Winter's Work,
Oh, nice.
and it's working with the snowy landscape.
Oh, that's great. Oh, I'm so glad you're teaching locally.
Yeah,
That's
it's great.
That's really great.
Yeah.
And going back a little bit to what I was talking about, that you have had what certainly seems like a satisfying career in art.
Yeah, sure.
And would you say that?
Yes, I did. It's what I wanted. I didn't know anything else. I didn't try to do anything else. And I wasn't good at anything else. So the idea of making a life out of what you have is what I've done.
Yeah.
It's like the materials,
That's right. That's right. And the acclaim, has that affected you at all? Has it affected how you work?
I think the idea of something I think about more now than any other time is appreciating and trying to be one of the many, not look how special I am. Whereas as a young person, and you have vim and vigor and muscle flexing ego and
Ambition.
Ambition
Yeah.
and trying to do something unique or special. I'm much less interested in that now. I'm interested in being part of the jigsaw, rather than the blackhead.
Well, that's saying a lot. One thing I wanted to mention is recently you had a commission called Temporary Pieces. Was that it?
Well, it was called On Edge. It was for
Oh.
an exhibition at the Aldrich Museum.
Yeah.
And it was part of a museum-wide exhibition of new and commissioned work. The section of the exhibition I was in was called On Edge. It was called the main exhibition was called The Domestic Plane. And I was in the section called On Edge, where sculptors, a group of half a dozen sculptors, were paired with furniture builders. Furniture builders made custom-made tables for the museum. We made unique works, and the curators paired them. The curator, Richard Klein, I should say, who had an exhibition at our museum here
At the museum.
last year.
Yep.
So we were commissioned to make a number of pieces. I made 3 pieces. Kept 3 pieces. I'd made more, but only kept 3. And my works, much of what I've done in sculpture is joining materials and forms together in a permanent way. And for this exhibition, I thought I would do something different, and that was to join materials together in a temporary way, using balance and clamps. And so they're rather fragile, and they have a different kind of life because they're not smushed together
They're
like
not permanent.
carpentry. They're not permanent. They're not joined literally. They're balanced on each other, forms that just sit in relation to like a barrel that's got a big heavy wooden mallet balanced inside it, and they're right on the edge of a table hanging off, and then the barrel is clamped with a big old wood clamp onto it.
I love that. And the thing, I did see a few of those photographs of a few of those, and what really struck me, and actually what strikes me a lot about many of the pieces that you have done over the years even, is there's a kind of poise to them. Maybe equipoise is probably a better word, but they're in balance somehow.
That's right. That's really good observation.
Somehow they also often seem to defy gravity, but the idea of something very heavy, in this sort of airy atmosphere is really, it's very appealing.
I love doing that.
I'll bet. I can see that.
I think early on my work was heavier and clunkier and very symmetrical. And as time got on, it got lighter in feel, even if it wasn't actually light. I mean, it's not that difficult to make a great big chunk of wood if it's on the wall look weightless.
For you.
Yeah, well, it's fun. It's fun to do. You know, it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but it's really. I like the idea of, you know, floating mass.
Yes, yes, and I think that that's something that, you know, as an observer, as someone coming to an exhibit and seeing that, that's what's striking about it. You don't know at first what it is, you know, that's affecting you, but then, you know, if you, like a lot of curators who can really analyze these kinds of things, realizing, you know, that, oh, it's these opposites that are coming together and forming something
And
new.
then you just walk to the side and you look down the walls like, oh, that's how you
The magician, right? And for you, Paul, at this point, in the studio and where you are in relationship to your art, what is it in the process of making things that is most alive for you?
Well, let's see. I'm doing, in the two-dimensional work right now, I'm making quite simple images in drawing and prints. So last winter I drew the Harris Hill ski jump because it's a very dramatic fall. If you're down at the bottom, you look up. I'm not interested in drawing skiers or jumpers or crowds necessarily, but that form of that little building off to the left, that's on stilts, and that huge long sweep with the structure up at the top and the stairs going on. You know, it's visually very, very dramatic.
Yes.
So I made some little prints of that. Simple domestic things like a bowl of fruit or stuff I found on the beach, and it sounds so pedestrian. But you know, I'm, no pun intended, I'm sort of drawn to that. I'm doing a series of self-portraits right now in the drawing, and I don't know if or how that's going to translate to sculpture yet. I don't know. That'll be the next act, I suppose.
Oh, well, we look forward to seeing that. That's a little bit of a new frontier.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Scavenging pieces of your life, right? And
oh, gosh. Yes, what's left? What is
there's
left?
lots left.
Let's hope.
There's lots left. Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks so much
This
for
is
coming
really
on
lovely.
the show.
And
Yeah.
thanks for all your time.
Oh.
You've been just great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for your time as well. We've enjoyed it. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. We will be back again next week. And stay tuned.